in North America and is working on 2 new book projects as well. The first examines 19th century African-led abolitionism and warfare along the Gulf and Guinea coast. The second interrogates the roots of counterinsurgency in the United States and the Americas broadly from the 1870s to the 1970s. Dr. Adjate is the back-to-back recipient of McGill's 2 teaching recommendations, 2023 Principal Prize for Excellence in Teaching, and 2022 the H. Noel Fieldhouse Award for Distinguished Teaching. He earned a Bachelor of Arts Honors degree in History and Political Science from the University of Toronto and a Master's in Political Science and Ethnic Immigration and Pluralism Studies, also from the University of Toronto. I mean, is that not Black excellence or what, right? He also obtained his PhD of Master's in Philosophy and Master's at Yale University in the Department of History and Department of African American Studies. Before pursuing an academic career, Dr. Adjate worked in a youth gang prevention and intervention in North Toronto, as well as in healthcare and education policy. He remains active in board governance for various causes, from the advancement of pluralism in Canada to climate change and forestation in North America and Africa. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Adjate. I'm also going to have you speak and then I'll...
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is my great pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with you all today. First and foremost, I must give due recognition and praise to the Creator, to the God of my ancestors, indeed to the covenant of my ancestors. Usabu late ukidi gidi begbete katamanso kache nunko ochupu bunyaga keje bua bukubegbe ubagbe keje usaba.
Yes, brother.
I give thanks to the spirit of my ancestors.
Yes.
My name is Wendell Ni Laye Adjate. Kinsmen and kinswomen and
Kings and queens.
others alike call me Ni Laye Osabu Kenklemo. Actually, Laye Manche on the African continent as well as in the African diaspora. Before I delve into my brief remarks this afternoon, I'd like to thank Marlon and his team, Harry, Vern, Denise, Carrie, Damani, so many others, and pardon me for those whom I've neglected to mention. You can tell that this is a fantastic work of coordination, logistics, vision, so thank you all. Alyssa, thank you for your kind introductory remarks. I'd like to thank Brent Chamberlain as well for reaching out to me on behalf of Victor and connecting me with Marlon and Harry, as well as key members of the CIBC Black
Chambers of Commerce
Employee Network. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. I'd also like to thank a very dear friend who's present today. His name is Mr. C. Arthur Downs, Charles Arthur Downs. Mr. Downs is not only a beloved friend, an elder and mentor, and confidant and counselor to myself. He is the senior most member of Black Toronto. I kid you not. He was born in 1927. If you see him, he looks like someone who's just like 45 years old. So that ancestral spirit is powerful. It reverberates. I'm so thrilled Mr. Downs could make it here today, and for some of you to connect with him. He truly is such an inspiring individual. He's done so much for African peoples in this country, very quietly, very discreetly. In fact, he was born literally just steps away from where we're gathering today. And so it's not only a pleasure for me, I hope that it will also be a pleasure for you all, and especially those who've had a chance to commiserate with him. Talent is universal and plentiful, but opportunity is scarce. Talent is universal and plentiful, but opportunity is scarce. To understand the premise of this maxim is to appreciate that there are certain rhythms in history, especially Black history. Why is history and Black history important and relevant? Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Jamaican by birth, but more or less a global citizen, and arguably the greatest, most influential, most impactful person of African descent in the 20th century, said, and I quote, "History is the landmark and guidepost of a people." History is the landmark and guidepost of a people, indeed of humanity. Whether one is a layperson, a physician, a lawyer, engineer, or bankers and entrepreneurs, history matters. And certainly Black history, that is the history of African peoples. Over 100 years ago, the president of the Canadian Bank of Commerce, which was the predecessor of CIBC, Sir Edmund Walker, understood the significance of studying history, particularly Black history. Walker held a life membership in the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded in Chicago in 1915. Dr. Carter G. Woodson was the child of enslaved Africans in Virginia. That notwithstanding, in his generation, he obtained a doctorate in history from Harvard University. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, of course, is the father, the founding father of what we call Black History Month. Sir Edmund Walker and Dr. Carter G. Woodson corresponded. They were acquaintances. They exchanged letters regarding the importance of Black history and supporting Black history, not only in the United States, but also in Canada. Sir Edmund Walker was also a close friend and ally and champion of an African-American immigrant named J.R.B. Whitney, Joseph Robert Burke Whitney, who came to Toronto from Ohio, the state of Ohio, around 1910, 1911. Both men, Sir Edmund Walker and J.R.B. Whitney, held high-ranking positions in their respective Black and white provincial Masonic order. In fact, Mr. Downs was very helpful in allowing me to appreciate the context of J.R.B. Whitney, who was residing in Toronto, an African-American in self-exile, if I may put it that way, in this city, and his counterpart, Sir Edmund Walker, in terms of their roles as high-ranking Freemasons. And Mr. Downs is not going to mind me sharing this. He is, incidentally, the highest-ranking, senior-most, eldest Freemason in the Western Hemisphere. So you are all in the presence of greatness. and a walking encyclopedia, if I may put it that way. As the founder of the premier black newspaper of his day, it was called the Canadian Observer. J.R.B. Whitney in the 1910s distinguished himself as the most influential black person or black leader in this country. In 1915, Whitney single-handedly convinced a shy and reticent Canadian federal government, which was virulently anti-black, to permit the mustering or recruitment of black servicemen, black soldiers, an all-black platoon under a black captain that would serve in World War I, overseas in Europe in World War I. In December 1915, J.R.B. Whitney organized a rally of sorts, and this rally was intended to promote his newspaper, the Canadian Observer. It was like certainly a black-owned newspaper, but the most important national black newspaper of its type in the 1910s. So December 1915, Whitney organized this rally, literally just steps from here on the University Strip. And he invited a friend of his, somebody who was a trusted interlocutor of sorts, a trusted friend, advisor, champion, ally. And that friend was Sir Edmund Walker. And Sir Edmund Walker had this distinction to deliver the keynote address at an all-black community event in a black building. Black stakeholders, little black babies, black mamas, black daddies. Sir Edmund Walker implored his all-black audience to recall the resilience that they, as descendants of enslaved Africans, have inherited from their forebears. He said, as a people who endured the crucible, literally went through the fire of transatlantic slavery, the plantation economies of the Americas, which, lest we forget, generated the surplus profits that would make the Western world the most prosperous and industrious of all nations. That was on the backs of Africans, enslaved Africans. Whitney said, Walker, Sir Edmund Walker, the president of what would later become CIBC, he said, as a people, history is so significant. You must remember, if you as a people have overcome the worst, one of the worst crimes against humanity, a protracted crime against humanity, a genocidal crime against humanity, then you should be able to overcome anything. And that you must lean on this history. Teach your children about this history. Draw inspiration from this history. Moreover, this very white man said, it is important that as African peoples, you don't shy away from embracing your race and being proud of who you are. Race pride. There was an ebony hued, 5'5", jet black Jamaican man at the time named Marcus Mosiah Garvey, preaching the exact same message.
Speak, brother, speak.
Sir Edmund Walker, in essence, believed that the combination of history and racial pride for African peoples was the stepping stone to self-determination and liberation from systems of white and colonial and imperial domination. Because, he concluded, no people or nation can achieve greatness without what? Knowledge of self and love of self. This is a very patrician, wealthy, powerful white man saying things you're not supposed to say openly, especially to people you want to suppress, subordinate, subjugate. For added context, Sir Edmund Walker was the chief architect of this then dominion, but this nation's banking system. He was that person. Incidentally, in a few days, March, the month of March will mark the centennial of his death. History teaches us rhythms, and if you pay very close attention, you'll see patterns. So it's remarkable how things converge this way, but next month will be 100 years since Sir Edmund Walker's passing away. Although some historians have portrayed Sir Edmund Walker as more or less being unidimensional, a unidimensional business leader, financial architect of Canada's banking system who was subject of the British Crown, a proud Canadian, a subject of the British Crown. Sir Edmund Walker was more than that. He was, in fact, a great believer in the power of US-Canadian cross-border ties, often referring to himself as, and I quote, a citizen of North America. Now, and I must underscore this point, a person of Sir Edmund Walker's wealth, power, race, gender, and generation. Let's keep in mind, this is the era of scientific racism, or I should say pseudo-scientific, fake scientific racism that was meant to keep black people down. Despite all of these factors, it is a profound lesson when we look at Sir Edmund Walker's connections to black communities, black leaders. It is a profound lesson in the goodwill that can unfold when powerful people, influential people, recognize human talent, notwithstanding the hue or race, notwithstanding gender, notwithstanding creed or religion, notwithstanding how one might love. And it wasn't just merely about recognizing talents of various peoples, it was also about creating opportunities to allow talent to flourish. In 1919, J.R.B. Whitney and his Windsor, Ontario born bride, whose name was Ada Kelly, and a brilliant sister, elder, ancestor, who was a pioneering educator, the couple decided to leave Toronto for New York City. Now keep in mind, J.R.B. Whitney is African American. He is ethnically African American, a black person from the United States. So they decided to leave Toronto in 1919. Walker, that is Sir Edmund Walker, wrote a letter of recommendation, effectively extolling the virtues of his black friend and fellow Freemason. Now, why would Sir Edmund Walker do this? It was 1919, and historians refer to 1919 as Red Summer. It was the bloodiest year on record in the United States, where white mobs initiated over 60 acts of racial terrorism, basically attacking black communities, bombing black communities, inflicting harm on unsuspecting black civilians. So Walker wrote this letter not merely to allow his friend to transition into the labor market or re-enter the labor market upon returning to the United States, but God forbid it, should him and his bride fall in the hands of a lynch mob, it might, maybe, serve as a get out of death sentence card of sorts. This is how crazy that era was. It might be difficult for us to appreciate that. So I will read a very short passage from the book, because with history, context matters greatly. And an audience ought to appreciate context in order to make sense of the times. So I'll read a passage, very short passage from chapter 1 of my book. It's entitled The Messianic Moments, 1919 to 1931. And I start the chapter with an epigraph. Down with their cheating of childhood and drunken orgies of war. Down, down, deep down, till the devil's strength be shorn, till some dim, darker David, a hoeing of his corn, married maiden, mother of God, bid the black Christ be born. W.E.B. Du Bois, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, one of the greatest, or arguably the greatest intellectual of this hemisphere in the last 500 years, a black man, authored this verse entitled The Riddle of the Sphinx. And Du Bois composed these words shortly after 1919. The year 1919 marked the tercentennial of chattel slavery's genesis in English North America. White supremacy may have warped notions of forgiveness, of forbearance, and of the significance of African bondage. But the arrival of this anniversary coincided with a watershed moment for racial consciousness. A resurgence of white power had toppled Reconstruction in the South, ushered in Jim Crow, and triggered an upsurge in Ku Klux Klan and other paramilitary activity among the white masses. In the lead up to 1919, the category of New Negro emerged in recognition of the fact that when under siege, it was spiritually and morally inexcusable to turn the other cheek. Scholars have pointed out that the idea of a new Negro was a bold act of language signifying the will to power to dare to recreate a race by renaming it. Race riots or white supremacist pogroms led by mobs bent on ethnic cleansing tested the mettle of the new Negro, sparking the 1919 Red Summer. As early as July, white mobs prowled the streets of Washington, D.C. in pursuit of imaginary black, and I kid you not, rapists. Black men, steps from the White House and Capitol were besieged. An African-American resident who witnessed the spectacle explained that black civilians responded to the ominous threat by summoning a fighting spirit buoyed up by deep religious fanaticism in pursuit of racial martyrdom. For the new Negro, the trauma of past injustices came before him like ghosts in a dream, and he swore by the best blood of his heart and to the eternal gods, they shall not pass. Indeed, the bloodlust of the would-be lynchers awoke the sleeping demon of race consciousness in ordinary black folk who who sensed the flavor of the glory of hate and dropped a sting of death into the white man's cup of arrogance. Now, this dramatic prose of this eyewitness account served a significant purpose, even if only rhetorical. The resident concluded that the new Negro, rebirthed in a baptism of unquenchable fire, reached its tipping point in 1919, vowing eye for eye, tooth for tooth, death for death, and damnation for damnation. Now, the experiences of African peoples, especially in the United States, in the last century, was horrendous. And it's hard to identify other analogs. That's not to take away from the very real forms of racism, whether it was against Chinese immigrants, certainly indigenous peoples, East Indians, some European groups, whether they were Polish or Ukrainian, Jewish, etc. There was significant amounts of racism and racial stratification in this society. And unfortunately, Black people often bore the brunt and shouldered the brunt of this racial discriminatory treatments. In some, the lessons gleaned from a group's past determines its fate or its future. There is so much that history can teach us about the workplace, about society, about humanity, and certainly about ourselves. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Wow.